The morning rush at Café Lumière always started the same way. The smell of fresh coffee beans filled the air as Maya Davidson tied her apron and greeted her co-workers with a tired smile. At 28, she had been working here for almost 5 years, and the routine was so familiar she could do it with her eyes closed. Set up the coffee machine, wipe down the counters, arrange the pastries in the display case, and get ready for the parade of half-awake customers who needed their morning fix. Another day, another $1, said Tina, the other morning waitress, as she pinned her name tag to her shirt. Maya nodded and hummed softly to herself, a habit she'd had since childhood. The tune wasn't from any song on the radio. It was something that had simply appeared in her head that morning, like a bird that had flown in through an open window. "That's pretty," Tina said, pausing to listen. "Is that new?" "I don't think I've heard it before." Maya shrugged. "Just something I made up." "You're always humming something different. You should record yourself sometime." The bell above the door jingled and their first customers walked in, a group of office workers from the building across the street. Maya switched into work mode, greeting them with a warm smile as she grabbed her notepad. For the next few hours, she moved between tables with practiced ease, taking orders, delivering plates of food, and refilling coffee cups. All the while, the melody continued to play in her head, growing and changing like a living thing. By lunchtime, it had developed into something complex, with layers that reminded her of rainfall on a quiet lake. "You seem distracted today," said Lou, the cafe owner, as Maya nearly bumped into him while carrying a tray of dirty dishes to the kitchen. "Sorry," she said, adjusting her grip on the tray. "Just got a lot on my mind." Lou was a kind man in his 60s who had opened the cafe after retiring from his job as an accountant. He had a soft spot for Maya, who never called in sick and always volunteered to work holiday shifts so others could be with their families. "Everything okay at home?" he asked, concern showing in the crinkles around his eyes. "Everything's fine," Maya assured him. "I just didn't sleep well last night." The truth was, she'd been up until 3 in the morning, sitting at her second-hand keyboard with headphones on, trying to capture a piece of music that had been haunting her for days. Her tiny apartment above the laundromat wasn't ideal for a musician. The walls were thin, and her neighbors had complained before, but it was all she could afford on waitress tips. Music had always been part of Maya's life, though not in any formal way. Her mother had noticed her unusual interest as a toddler, how she would stop whatever she was doing whenever music played. At 6, Maya had begged for piano lessons after seeing someone play at a school assembly, but there had never been enough money for that kind of luxury. Instead, she taught herself on a small keyboard her uncle had found at a yard sale, figuring out songs by ear and making up her own when she ran out of things to play. By the time she was a teenager, Maya knew she had a gift, but she also knew gifts didn't pay the bills. After high school, while her classmates went off to college, she went straight to work, first at a grocery store, then at a diner, and finally at Café Lumière. The keyboard came with her from apartment to apartment, a reminder of what might have been in another life. The afternoon crowd at the cafe was different from the morning rush. More college students with laptops, retired folks meeting friends for coffee and chess, and the occasional writer or artist taking advantage of the free Wi-Fi and relaxed atmosphere. Maya enjoyed the afternoon shift. The pace was slower, and Lou often played classical music over the speakers, which fed her constantly hungry musical mind. Today, it was Chopin, one of her favorites. As she wiped down a table near the window, she found herself mentally adding notes to what was playing, creating a counter-melody that complemented the recording. Her fingers tapped silently against her thigh, playing invisible keys. "You play, don't you?" The question came from an older woman at the table next to where Maya was cleaning. Her white hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and intelligent eyes peered over reading glasses. Maya was startled out of her musical daydream. "Excuse me?" "Piano," the woman said, gesturing to Maya's tapping fingers. "You play, I can tell. My husband was a pianist. He used to do the same thing, playing music that no one else could hear." Maya felt her cheeks grow warm. She wasn't used to being noticed. "Just a hobby," she said, picking up her cleaning cloth. "Nothing serious." The woman looked unconvinced but didn't press further. "Well, it's a lovely hobby to have." By 7 o'clock, the cafe was nearly empty. Lou had gone home early for his grandson's birthday party, leaving Maya to close up. She liked closing shifts. The quiet after a long day of noise and movement, the satisfaction of putting everything in order for tomorrow. As she swept the floor, she found herself once again lost in music. The melody that had been with her all day had evolved into something rich and textured. In her mind, she could hear every note, every chord progression, as clear as if it were being played by a full orchestra. Her eyes drifted to the small upright piano in the corner of the cafe. Lou had bought it years ago for weekend performances. Local musicians would play on Friday and Saturday nights for tips and a free meal. It wasn't a grand piano by any means, but it was real, with weighted keys and true resonance, unlike her cheap keyboard at home. Maya looked at the clock. 7:30 p.m. The cafe closed at 8 quaig, and no one had come in for the past half hour. The only other employee, a kitchen helper named Ray, had already left after cleaning the kitchen. She put down her broom and walked over to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing down. It had been tuned recently for a weekend performer, and she knew it would sound good. Maya glanced at the door, then back at the piano. Just a few minutes, she thought. Just to hear how the music in her head would sound on a real instrument. She sat down on the bench and positioned her hands, closing her eyes for a moment to gather the notes that had been swirling in her mind all day. Then she began to play. The music flowed from her fingers as naturally as breathing. It started gently, like the first light of dawn, then built slowly, adding layers and complexity. Maya lost herself in the sound, forgetting where she was, forgetting everything except the joy of finally hearing out loud what had been playing in her imagination. She didn't stick to any particular style or genre. The piece moved from classical influences to jazz-like improvisations, then to something that couldn't be easily categorized, music that was uniquely hers. Her hands moved across the keys with a confidence that came from somewhere deep inside, some place of knowing that had always been there. Time disappeared as Maya played. She didn't hear the bell above the door when it opened, didn't notice the figure standing in the entrance, briefcase in hand, listening with growing amazement. Professor Richard Bennett had come back to the cafe to retrieve the leather briefcase he'd left under his table earlier that afternoon. A respected pianist and music teacher at the city's conservatory, he'd been preoccupied with thoughts of the upcoming recital season when he'd left the cafe, not realizing his mistake until he was already home. Now he stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break the spell of what he was hearing. The music coming from the cafe's old upright piano was unlike anything he'd encountered in his 30 years of teaching. It was technically complex yet emotionally accessible, innovative yet somehow timeless, and it was being played by a waitress in an apron, her eyes closed, completely absorbed in the act of creation. As the piece reached its conclusion, flowing like a river into a peaceful sea, Richard found himself holding his breath. The final notes hung in the air, and then silence fell over the cafe. Maya opened her eyes and let out a long, satisfied breath. For a moment she sat perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on the keys. Then she noticed a movement at the edge of her vision and turned toward the door. Their eyes met. Across the empty cafe, the waitress and the professor connected by the invisible thread of music that still seemed to vibrate in the air between them. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment would change both their lives forever. For what felt like forever, Maya and the stranger stared at each other across the empty cafe. Her fingers still rested on the piano keys and her heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't meant for anyone to hear her play. It felt too personal, like someone reading her diary without permission. The man took a step forward. He was tall with salt and pepper hair and wore a tweed jacket that reminded Maya of her high school English teacher. He carried a leather briefcase and had the kind of posture that suggested years of sitting up straight at a piano bench. "I'm sorry," Maya said, standing up quickly and smoothing her apron. "The cafe is about to close." The man didn't seem to hear her. "That piece," he said, his voice quiet with wonder. "What was it called?" Maya shrugged, uncomfortable under his intense gaze. "It doesn't have a name. I was just playing, he repeated, as if the words made no sense to him. "Do you mind if I ask where you studied?" A small laugh escaped her. "I didn't study anywhere. I'm just a waitress." The man shook his head slowly. "No one is just anything. And what I just heard wasn't just playing." He stepped closer and extended his hand. "I'm Richard Bennett. I teach piano at the conservatory." Maya hesitated before shaking his hand. Maya Davidson. Maya, he repeated as if committing the name to memory. How long have you been playing? She thought about the keyboard her uncle had given her, how she'd spent countless hours teaching herself, picking out melodies she heard on the radio or TV. Since I was little, I guess. But not seriously or anything. I never had lessons. Richard's eyebrows shot up. Never? Not even basic instruction? Maya shook her head. We couldn't afford it. She glanced at the clock behind the counter. I'm sorry, but I really do need to close up. Of course, Richard said, but he made no move to leave. Instead, he set his briefcase on a nearby table and opened it. I came back for this, but now I'm glad I forgot it. He pulled out a business card and held it out to her. I'd very much like to hear you play again, perhaps in a more formal setting. Maya didn't take the card. I don't perform. I was just messing around. Messing around, Richard echoed, looking bewildered. Maya, what you were playing was extraordinarily complex. The harmonic structure, the counterpoint, these aren't things people just mess around with. He set the card on the piano. Please consider calling me. I host a small gathering at my home each month for colleagues and students. Nothing fancy, just an evening of music and conversation. I would be honored if you would play for us. The idea of playing for a room full of music professors and conservatory students made Maya's stomach twist into knots. I don't think I'd fit in at something like that. Richard smiled gently. Music doesn't care about fitting in. It only cares about being honest. He picked up his briefcase. The card has my cell phone number. If you change your mind, the next gathering is this Friday at 8. After he left, Maya locked the door behind him and leaned against it, her heart still racing. She looked at the business card on the piano. Richard Bennett, Professor of Piano Performance, City Conservatory of Music. Below that was an email address and phone number. She slipped the card into her pocket and finished closing the cafe, trying to push the encounter out of her mind. But as she walked home through the chilly evening air, Richard's words kept coming back to her. Music doesn't care about fitting in. It only cares about being honest. The next few days passed in a blur of coffee orders and dirty dishes. Maya didn't mention her encounter with the professor to anyone. Not even Tina or Lou. It felt like a strange dream. Something that had happened to someone else. But every night when she got home, she would take out Richard's card and look at it, running her thumb over the embossed letters. Then she would sit at her keyboard and play until her neighbors banged on the wall, trying to capture what she had felt that night at the cafe. Thursday evening, Lou called her into his office before her shift ended. Got a strange request today, he said, leaning back in his chair. A Professor Bennett called. Says he's a regular customer. Lou gave her a questioning look. He asked if you could have Friday night off. Said something about a musical opportunity. You know anything about this? Maya felt her face grow warm. He heard me playing the piano the other night after closing. It's no big deal. Lou's eyebrows shot up. No big deal? Maya, Richard Bennett isn't just any professor. He's one of the top pianists in the city. His students win international competitions. If he's interested in your playing, that's a very big deal. How do you know who he is? Maya asked, surprised. Lou smiled. I may look like just an old cafe owner now, but I used to play a little jazz in my younger days. I know the music scene in this city. He leaned forward, his expression serious. You can have Friday off, and I think you should go to whatever this opportunity is. I'm not ready to play for people like that, Maya said, panic rising in her chest. They're all trained musicians. I'd make a fool of myself. Or maybe you'd surprise yourself, Lou said. Sometimes the biggest regrets in life are the chances we didn't take. He handed her a slip of paper with a phone number. That's my cell. Call me afterward and tell me how it went. Whatever you decide. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She paced her small apartment, alternating between looking at Richard's card and staring out the window at the city lights. She tried to imagine herself sitting at a piano in some fancy home, playing for people who could probably tell Bach from Beethoven blindfolded. By morning, she had made up her mind. She wouldn't go. It was a nice offer, but not for someone like her. She got dressed for her afternoon shift at the cafe, planning to tell Lou she'd decided against it. But when she arrived, there was a package waiting for her behind the counter. Delivered this morning, Tina said, handing it to her. Secret admirer? The package was wrapped in simple brown paper with Maya's name written on it in elegant handwriting. There was no return address. Puzzled, she opened it to find a CD with a handwritten note. Maya, this is a recording from last month's gathering. Nothing formal, just friends sharing music with friends. I hope it gives you some idea of what to expect. No pressure, but I've told my colleagues about your remarkable talent, and they are very much looking forward to meeting you. The address is on the back. Richard. Maya slipped the CD into her bag, unsure what to do. Throughout her shift, she kept thinking about the package, about Lou's words regarding regrets, about the music that was always playing in her head, seeking an outlet. After work, she rushed home and played the CD. The recording quality wasn't great, just someone's phone or portable recorder capturing a living room performance. But the music was beautiful. A woman played a haunting Chopin nocturne. Then a young man performed what sounded like his own jazz composition. There was laughter between pieces, the clink of glasses, the warm murmur of conversation. It sounded nice, not intimidating. Just people who loved music sharing it with each other. Maya looked at her closet. She owned exactly one dress that might be appropriate for an evening at a professor's home. A simple black one she'd bought for a cousin's wedding 2 years ago. She took it out and laid it on the bed, then went to shower. An hour later, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The dress still fit, and she'd pulled her hair back into a neat bun. She wore a pair of small pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, the only nice jewelry she owned. "This is crazy," she whispered to her reflection. "What am I doing?" But something deeper than her fear was pushing her forward. The memory of how it felt to play on a real piano, to let the music in her head flow out into the world. Professor Bennett lived in a brownstone in one of the city's older neighborhoods. As Maya approached the address, she could hear music drifting from an open window, someone playing a lively piece on what sounded like a very fine piano. She hesitated on the sidewalk, her courage faltering. A young couple walked past her and up the steps to Richard's door. They were about her age but carried themselves with confidence. The woman held a violin case. Maya took a deep breath and followed them. The door was opened by Richard himself, who broke into a wide smile when he saw her. "Maya, you came." He seemed genuinely delighted, which helped calm her nerves a little. "Please, come in. We're just getting started." The living room was larger than Maya had expected, dominated by a beautiful grand piano. About 20 people stood in small groups, chatting and holding glasses of wine. They looked up when Richard let her in, curiosity in their eyes. "Everyone," Richard said, raising his voice slightly to be heard. "This is Maya Davidson, the remarkable pianist I've been telling you about." Maya felt her face flush as people smiled and nodded at her. A woman about Richard's age approached, holding out a glass of wine. "Don't let Richard intimidate you," she said kindly. "He gets excited about new talent. I'm Grace, his wife. It's lovely to meet you." "Thank you," Maya said, taking the wine. "I'm not sure I should be here. I'm not trained like everyone else." Grace's eyes twinkled. "That's exactly why you should be here. Richard says you have something most trained pianists would give anything for: a truly original voice." Before Maya could respond, Richard called for everyone's attention. "Let's begin our evening of music. Philip, I believe you're first on our informal program." A young man with glasses nodded and took his place at the piano. He played a complex piece that Maya recognized as Liszt, his fingers flying over the keys with practiced precision. The room applauded enthusiastically when he finished. Several other performances followed. The young couple she had seen earlier played a violin and piano duet, and an older gentleman sang an aria in Italian, accompanied by Grace on the piano. Maya sat rigid with tension, knowing her turn was approaching. What had she been thinking? These people were all so good, so polished. Her playing would sound childish by comparison. Finally, Richard stood up. "And now I've saved something special for last. Maya Davidson is new to our gathering, but I assure you what you're about to hear is extraordinary." He turned to her with an encouraging smile. "Maya, whenever you're ready." With her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it, Maya walked to the piano and sat down. The keys gleamed under the soft lighting, inviting her fingers to touch them. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Then, without overthinking it, she began to play the same piece that had flowed from her fingers that night in the cafe. The room disappeared. The watching eyes faded away. There was only the music, her music, filling the space around her. She played with the same abandoned joy she felt when alone. letting the melodies and harmonies take shape as they wished, following them where they led. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the silence that followed was absolute. Maya opened her eyes to see every person in the room staring at her with identical expressions of astonishment. And then the applause began. Not polite clapping, but a thunderous ovation. People were standing, their faces alive with wonder and excitement. Richard was beaming, nodding as if to say, "See? I told you." As Maya stood on shaky legs, people surged toward her, asking questions all at once. "Who composed that piece? Where did you study? How long have you been performing?" Grace appeared at her side, a steadying presence. "Give her room to breathe," she said firmly, and the crowd stepped back a little. A tall woman with silver hair approached. "I'm Diane Wilson, Dean of the Conservatory," she said, her eyes intense. "That was one of the most original compositions I've heard in years." "Have you written it down? Is there a score?" Maya shook her head. "It's just something I play. I don't know how to write music." Diane and Richard exchanged a look. "Maya," Richard said gently, "I think we need to talk about your future." The week after the gathering at Richard's house, Maya's life split in two. During the day, she still wore her apron and served coffee at Café Lumière. But 3 evenings a week, she now sat in Richard's study, learning to read and write music, skills she'd never needed. Before, when the notes lived, only in her head and under her fingers. "It's like learning a new language as an adult," she told Tina during a slow afternoon shift. "I already speak it, but now I have to learn how to spell the words." Tina looked up from restocking sugar packets. "I still can't believe you're taking lessons from Professor Bennett. Lou says he charges his students a fortune." Maya shook her head. "He's not charging me anything. He says I'm a special case." Richard had been clear from the beginning. Maya's talent was too extraordinary to go undeveloped. "You have a gift that most musicians work their entire lives to achieve," he told her. "You play by instinct what others can only accomplish through years of study. But imagine what you could do if you had the technical knowledge to match your natural ability." Diane Wilson, the conservatory dean, had arranged for Maya to have access to practice rooms at the school during off hours. The first time she sat at one of their concert grands, instruments worth more than she'd earned in 10 years at the cafe, Maya had nearly cried at the rich, responsive sound. "That piano is practically playing itself for you," a janitor had commented, pausing in the doorway with his mop. "Most students have to fight with it." The news about Maya spread quickly through the city's musical circles. Richard had recorded her performance at his house, and copies of the recording passed from person to person. Each listener amazed to learn that the pianist was a self-taught waitress who couldn't read music. On a rainy Tuesday, Maya arrived at work to find Lou looking troubled. "Something wrong?" she asked as she tied her apron. "We need to talk," he said, nodding toward his small office. Once the door closed behind them, Lou handed her a local arts magazine. Page 7. Maya opened it to find a small article with the headline, "Café Waitress, the next Mozart." There was a photo of her serving coffee, clearly taken without her knowledge. "Oh no," she whispered, scanning the text. The article described her as a musical phenomenon and a natural genius who had been discovered playing after hours at a local cafe. "They've been calling all morning," Lou said. "Reporters, music people, even some TV show. I've been telling them you're not available for comment." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. "What should I do?" Lou shrugged. "Depends on what you want, kid. If you're serious about this music thing, it could be good publicity. If not, it'll blow over eventually." The bell above the cafe door jingled, and they heard Tina greet the first customers of the day. "Think about it," Lou said, standing up. "No rush to decide anything. And Maya? Whatever you choose, I've got your back." That afternoon, the cafe was busier than usual. People came in asking specifically for Maya, watching her as she served their coffee, some even taking pictures with their phones. A few asked her to sign their copies of the magazine. By the time her shift ended, Maya felt like she might scream if one more person asked her to play something for them. "I can't do this," she told Richard over the phone that evening, pacing her small apartment. "I'm not ready for people to know about me. I'm not ready for any of this." "I understand," Richard said, his voice calm, "but hiding your talent isn't the answer either. What if we channel this attention into something controlled, give people a chance to hear you in a proper setting?" "What do you mean?" "The conservatory has a recital hall. Small, just 100 seats. Diane has offered to let us use it for an invitation-only performance. Just a handful of music critics, some faculty, a few conservatory patrons, people who can appreciate what they're hearing without turning you into a circus act. Maya's stomach twisted at the thought of playing for critics. I don't know, Richard. Think of it as practice, he said gently. If music is going to be part of your life, and I believe it should be, you'll need to get comfortable performing. This is a safe place to start. After a long pause, Maya agreed. They set a date 3 weeks away, enough time for her to prepare properly without losing her nerve. The next day at the cafe, Lou called her into his office again. This time he had a visitor, a sleek woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as Vivian Porter, from Porter Artist Management. I represent classical musicians, Vivian explained, handing Maya her card. And I'd like to discuss representing you. Maya looked at Lou, who nodded encouragingly. It might be good to have someone handling the business side of things, he said. Vivian laid out what she could offer. Managing performance requests, negotiating fees, building Maya's career strategically. You have something special, she said. My job would be to make sure the world gets to experience it, on your terms. Maya thought about the people taking her picture in the cafe, about the small recital Richard was planning. Things were moving so fast. I need time to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Vivian replied, standing to leave. But don't wait too long. Opportunities like this have a way of slipping away if you don't grab them. That night, unable to sleep, Maya called the number Lou had given her weeks ago. The night Professor Bennett first heard her play. I don't know what to do, she told him after explaining about Vivian Porter. Everything's happening so quickly. Lou was quiet for a moment. You know, he said finally, my biggest regret isn't that I never made it big as a musician. It's that I never really tried. I was too scared of failing, so I settled for a safe life instead. But your life turned out okay, right? You have the cafe, you seem happy. I am happy, Lou agreed. But sometimes I wonder what might have been. That's all I'm saying. Whatever you decide, make sure it's what you truly want, not what's safest or easiest. The days flew by. Maya continued working at the cafe, though Lou adjusted her schedule to give her more time for practicing. She met with Vivian twice more and ultimately signed a 6-month contract. Just to see how it goes, Maya insisted. At Richard's suggestion, she prepared 3 pieces for the recital, a Chopin nocturne to show she could interpret the classics, a jazz standard to demonstrate her versatility, and one of her own compositions, which Richard had helped her write down. The night before the recital, Maya couldn't eat or sleep. She sat at her keyboard until dawn, playing her pieces over and over, imagining judgmental eyes watching her every move. When she finally arrived at the conservatory the next evening, she was exhausted and terrified. Richard met her at the stage door, his face concerned. You look like you haven't slept, he said. I haven't, Maya admitted. Richard led her to a small dressing room. The hall is nearly full, he told her. But remember, everyone out there wants you to succeed. They're here because they believe in your talent. Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She felt like she might throw up or faint or both. A young woman poked her head into the room. 5 minutes, Professor Bennett. Richard squeezed Maya's shoulder. I'll be in the front row. Just play like you did that night in the cafe, like no one's watching. Alone in the dressing room, Maya closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. She thought about Lou's words about regrets, about Richard's belief in her, about the music that had always been her companion, her solace, her joy. When a stagehand knocked to tell her it was time, Maya rose and followed him through the darkened wings to the stage. The lights were bright, blinding her to the audience, but she could feel their presence, their expectation. She sat at the gleaming grand piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. For a terrifying moment, her mind went blank. Then she took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The Chopin came first. Notes she had memorized through hours of practice. She played it well, but stiffly, aware of every small mistake, every nuance she missed. The audience applauded politely when she finished. Next came the jazz piece, a Thelonious Monk composition that Richard had suggested for its complexity and room for improvisation. As she played, Maya felt herself begin to relax, to lean into the music rather than fight it. By the final chorus, she was adding her own flourishes, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The applause was warmer this time. Finally, it was time for her own composition, the piece that had first caught Richard's attention that night in the cafe. As she began to play, something shifted inside her. This wasn't music she had learned. This was music she had created. Music that came from some deep, authentic place within her. Her fingers moved across the keys with complete freedom, the notes flowing exactly as she heard them in her head. She forgot about the audience, forgot about the critics, forgot about everything except the pure joy of making music. When the final note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the hall erupted in applause. Not polite appreciation, but genuine, enthusiastic acclaim. People were standing calling out "Brava." Maya opened her eyes, blinking in the bright lights, and saw Richard in the front row, applauding with tears streaming down his face. She stood and bowed awkwardly, unused to such attention. As the applause continued, she noticed Lou at the back of the hall, clapping and nodding with a proud smile. Beside him stood Tina and several other cafe employees who had come to support her. After 3 curtain calls, Maya finally escaped backstage, where Richard was waiting. "That was magnificent," he said, embracing her. "Especially your composition. You played it even better than at my house." Before Maya could respond, Vivian appeared with a small crowd of people, music critics, radio hosts, record label executives. They surrounded Maya, asking questions, offering congratulations, handing her cards with requests to call them. "Give her some space," Vivian said firmly, guiding Maya to a quieter corner. "How are you feeling?" Maya shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't know. Good, I think. Scared. Excited. Well, get used to it," Vivian said with a smile. "The critic from the Times is already writing his review, and from what I overheard, it's going to make that magazine article look like nothing. By tomorrow, everyone in the city's music world will know your name." Maya felt a flash of panic. "What does that mean? What happens now?" Vivian's smile widened. "Now? Now we decide which opportunities to accept. You've got options, Maya. Very good ones." As the reality of the situation sank in, Maya realized that her life had irreversibly changed. There was no going back to being just a waitress, to having the music exist only in her head and her tiny apartment. The thought was both terrifying and thrilling. Later that night, after the crowd had dispersed, Maya sat alone on the edge of the stage, her fingers tracing the piano keys without pressing them down. "You played beautifully," Lou said, walking down the center aisle toward her. "I'm not a fancy music critic, but even I could tell it was something special." Maya smiled tiredly. "Thanks for coming. And for everything else. Giving me time off to practice, dealing with all those people at the cafe." Lou waved away her thanks. "You know what the best part was? Watching you up here looking so completely at home. Like this is where you were always meant to be." Maya considered his words. For the first time since Richard had discovered her playing in the cafe, she felt a sense of rightness, of belonging. The stage lights, the gleaming piano, the rapt audience. It had all felt strangely familiar, as if she'd been there before. "In dreams, perhaps, maybe it is," she said softly. 3 months after her recital, Maya sat in Vivian's sleek downtown office, staring at the calendar on the wall. Every day was filled with commitments, practice sessions, recording dates, interviews, meetings with composers and conductors. Her name appeared regularly in the art section of major newspapers, and a short documentary about her unusual journey was in production for public television. "It's too much," Maya said, pushing away the schedule Vivian had prepared for the coming month. "I need time to breathe, to actually play music for the joy of it." Vivian's perfectly manicured fingers tapped her desk. "This is what success looks like, Maya. Everyone wants a piece of you right now. If we slow down, they'll move on to the next sensation." Maya thought of her tiny apartment, now filled with flowers from admirers and stacks of sheet music she was expected to learn. She hadn't been back to Café Lumière in weeks, not even as a customer. Lou sent her text messages occasionally, but she was often too busy or too tired to respond. "What about this Whitmore Hall invitation?" Vivian asked, changing tactics. "They almost never feature new artists. But the director attended your performance at the Chamber Music Society last month and was apparently blown away." Maya had heard of Whitmore Hall, the most prestigious concert venue in the city, where world-famous orchestras and soloists performed. The thought of playing there made her stomach twist with anxiety. What would I even play? She asked. That's the interesting part, Vivian said, leaning forward. They don't want you to perform existing pieces. They want you to compose something original, a full concert piece for piano and orchestra. Maya blinked. I've never written anything that complex. I've barely learned to write down my own solo pieces, which is why they're giving you 6 months to prepare. They understand you're still developing your formal skills. Vivian's eyes gleamed with excitement. This could be huge, Maya. Career-defining. On her way home, Maya rode the subway in a daze, thinking about Whitmore Hall and orchestras and the hundreds of people who would pay to hear her music. It felt unreal, like she was living someone else's life. As she neared her stop, she noticed a man reading a newspaper. There on the arts page was a small headline: Cafe Waitress Phenomenon. Genuine talent or clever marketing. The article was too small to read from where she stood, but the headline alone made her chest tighten. At home, she searched for the article online and found it was just one of several recent pieces questioning her abilities. One critic wrote that her technical skills were underdeveloped and amateurish, while another suggested her success was due more to her compelling backstory than to any exceptional talent. A waitress who plays by ear makes for good press, wrote one particularly harsh reviewer, but Davidson's limitations become painfully apparent when she attempts the classical repertoire. She lacks the refinement that comes only through years of proper training. Maya closed her laptop, her eyes burning with unshed tears. The worst part was that deep down she feared they were right. When she performed classical pieces, she felt like an imposter, struggling to interpret music that others had spent lifetimes mastering. Only when she played her own compositions did she feel truly confident, truly herself. She picked up her phone and, for the first time in weeks, called Richard. The critics are right, she said when he answered, not bothering with a greeting. I'm out of my depth, Richard sighed. I was wondering when you'd see those reviews. They're not all negative, you know. Enough of them are. And Vivian wants me to compose a piece for Whitmore Hall, for a full orchestra. I can't do it, Richard. I'll make a fool of myself. Come over, he said after a pause, not for a lesson, just to talk. An hour later, Maya sat in Richard's study, a cup of tea growing cold beside her. The familiar room, with its shelves of music books and framed concert programs, had become a sanctuary over the past months. You're experiencing what many musicians face at some point, Richard said, sitting across from her. The gap between your inner vision and your technical ability to express it. The difference is that most musicians struggle in private for years before facing public scrutiny. So what do I do? Maya asked, her voice small. You have 2 choices, Richard said, leaning forward. You can retreat, take time away from performing to focus on developing your skills. Or you can move forward, accepting that your journey is happening in public with all the criticism that entails. Which would you choose? Richard smiled gently. It's not about what I would do. It's about what feels right to you. But I will say this. Your gift isn't your technical perfection. It's your authentic voice, your ability to create music that moves people in a way that even the most technically accomplished performances sometimes fail to do. Maya stared out the window at the darkening sky. Whitmore Hall wants me to write a piece for piano and orchestra. I don't know if I can. Of course you can, Richard said with certainty. You've been composing orchestral music in your head for years. You just didn't have the vocabulary to name what you were doing. Now you do. For the next 2 weeks, Maya withdrew from public appearances. She canceled interviews and declined invitations. Vivian was furious, but Maya stood firm. 6 months isn't long to compose and prepare a piece for Whitmore Hall, she told her manager. I need to focus. She rented a small studio space with a piano, away from the distractions of her apartment and the prying eyes of the public. There she spent hours each day working on her composition, sometimes forgetting to eat or sleep when the music took hold of her. Richard visited occasionally to offer guidance on orchestration and form, but he was careful not to impose his own ideas. This has to be your voice, he insisted, not mine or anyone else's. A month into her work, Maya hit a wall. The piece had started strongly, but now she felt lost, uncertain where to take it next. Nothing she played satisfied her. After a particularly frustrating day, she left the studio early and found herself walking to Café Lumière. It was nearly closing time when she arrived. The familiar bell jingled as she pushed open the door, and the smell of coffee and pastries wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Tina looked up from wiping a table and gasped. "Maya, oh my God, it's been forever." Before Maya knew what was happening, she was enveloped in a tight hug. Over Tina's shoulder, she saw Lou emerge from the back room, his face breaking into a wide smile. "Look what the wind blew in," he said, coming over to give her a hug of his own. "The famous pianist remembers us little people." Maya felt tears spring to her eyes. "I've missed this place." "Missed you all." Lou studied her face. "You look tired, kid. Everything okay?" "Not really," Maya admitted. "I'm stuck on this piece I'm writing and nothing feels right. And there are these critics saying I'm not good enough, that I'm just a novelty act." She trailed off, embarrassed by the catch in her voice. Lou gestured to a corner table. "Sit, I'll get you some tea." For the next hour, Maya poured out her fears and frustrations while Lou and Tina listened. No advice, no judgment, just the comfort of being with people who knew her before she was the piano waitress. People who cared about Maya the person, not Maya the musical phenomenon. As the cafe grew dark around them, Maya felt something shift inside her. The knot of anxiety that had been tightening in her chest for weeks began to loosen. "You know what your problem is?" Lou said finally. "You're playing for them now, the critics, the audiences, even Vivian. You need to play for yourself again, like you did that night after closing." Maya nodded slowly. "I think you're right. Somewhere along the way, I started hearing other voices in my head while I compose. What Richard would think, what the critics might say, what Vivian would want. So tune them out," Tina said simply. "Get back to whatever made you sit down at that piano when you thought no one was listening." The next morning, Maya returned to her studio with renewed purpose. She pushed aside all the pages of notation she'd been working on and closed her eyes. For a long time, she simply sat in silence, letting her mind clear. Then, without planning or analyzing, she began to play. Not the grand, complex piece she'd been struggling with, but something simpler, more personal. Music that told the story of her journey from that first night in the cafe to now. She played for hours, following the music wherever it led her. Sometimes it was joyful, sometimes melancholy, sometimes full of doubt and fear, but through it all ran a thread of authenticity that had been missing from her work for weeks. When she finally stopped, exhausted but exhilarated, she realized she had found the heart of her Whitmore Hall composition. It wouldn't be a traditional concerto designed to showcase technical brilliance. It would be the story of an unlikely musician finding her voice in a world that both celebrated and questioned her. Over the next few months, Maya worked with a new sense of freedom. She still met with Richard for technical guidance, still dealt with Vivian's pressure for public appearances, still faced criticism from those who doubted her legitimacy. But none of that touched the core of what she was creating. As word spread about her upcoming Whitmore debut, the music world's curiosity grew. Would the self-taught pianist prove her critics wrong or confirm their doubts? Could someone with such limited formal training really compose for a full orchestra? A week before the performance, Maya received a package at her apartment. Inside was a new apron from Café Lumière with a note in Lou's handwriting. "For after the show, your job is still here if you need it." Maya laughed through her tears, touched by the gesture. The night before her Whitmore Hall debut, Maya couldn't sleep. She paced her apartment, going over the music in her head, imagining all the things that could go wrong. What if the orchestra couldn't follow her? What if she froze on stage? What if the audience hated the piece? At dawn, she gave up on sleep and went to her piano. Rather than practicing her composition one more time, she played simple scales and exercises, the first things Richard had taught her when they began their lessons. The familiar patterns calmed her racing mind, reminding her how far she'd come in such a short time. Later that morning, she went to Whitmore Hall for a final rehearsal with the orchestra. The conductor, a stern woman named Helena, who had initially seemed skeptical of Maya, now watched her with growing respect as they worked through the piece. "You've created something quite remarkable," Helena told her during a break. "Not what I expected at all." "Is that good or bad?" Maya asked. Helena's serious face relaxed into a small smile. "Let's just say I'm looking forward to tonight more than I was a month ago." As the musicians packed up their instruments, Maya remained at the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. The vast hall, with its perfect acoustics and rich history, no longer felt intimidating. It felt like exactly where she was meant to be. "Ready for tonight?" Richard asked, appearing at the edge of the stage. Maya took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Remember," Richard said, his voice gentle, "whatever happens, you've already accomplished something extraordinary. Not just with your music, but with your courage to share it with the world." Maya smiled at her teacher, her mentor, her friend. "Thank you. For everything." As she left the hall to rest before the evening's performance, Maya felt a curious sense of calm. The critics would say what they would say. The audience would respond however they responded. But for the first time since this journey began, she knew with certainty that the music she had created was truly her own. Not what anyone else expected or wanted, but the genuine expression of her unique voice, and no matter what happened tonight, no one could take that away from her. The evening of the Whitmore Hall performance arrived with a light spring rain that left the city streets shimmering under the streetlights. Maya stood backstage, peering through a small gap in the curtains at the audience filing into the grand hall. Every one of the 2,000 seats would be filled tonight. Nervous? Helena, the conductor, appeared beside her in full concert attire. Maya nodded, unable to find her voice. Her hands, those instruments that had carried her from a cafe to this prestigious stage, trembled slightly. "Good," Helena said with a small smile. "The day you stop feeling nervous before a performance is the day you should quit. It means you no longer care enough." Backstage was a flurry of activity as orchestra members tuned their instruments and adjusted their formal wear. Maya felt out of place in her simple black gown, so different from the casual clothes she'd worn serving coffee just months ago. Richard appeared, looking distinguished in his tuxedo. "I just wanted to wish you luck before I take my seat," he said, giving her a brief, warm hug. "What if they hate it?" Maya whispered, finally voicing her deepest fear. "What if everyone realizes I don't belong here?" Richard's eyes were kind but serious. "Listen to me, Maya. No one can tell you where you belong except you. In music, true music isn't about belonging anyway. It's about connecting, about sharing something honest from one soul to another." He squeezed her shoulders gently. "Just play your truth. The rest will take care of itself." A stagehand approached, clipboard in hand. "5 minutes, Miss Davidson." As Richard left to find his seat, Maya caught a glimpse of familiar faces in the wings. Lou and Tina, along with several other staff members from Café Lumière, all dressed in their finest clothes. Lou gave her a thumbs up and Tina blew her a kiss. Maya closed her eyes, taking slow, deep breaths the way Richard had taught her. She thought about the piece she was about to play, the music that had flowed from her hands in that small studio after her visit to the cafe. It told her story, not just the notes and melodies, but the emotions behind them, the surprise of discovery, the thrill of recognition, the doubt and fear, and finally, the acceptance of her unique gift. The house lights dimmed and the audience fell silent. Helena stepped onto the stage to polite applause, and the orchestra members straightened in their chairs, instruments at the ready. Maya's heartbeat thundered in her ears as a stagehand guided her to the entrance. From the darkness of the wings, the stage looked impossibly bright, impossibly vast. "And now," the announcer's voice echoed through the hall, making her Whitmore Hall debut, pianist and composer Maya Davidson. The moment had arrived. Maya stepped into the light. The applause that greeted her was respectful but reserved, the response of an audience that had read the mixed reviews, that had heard the rumors and debates about whether this untrained waitress truly deserved to stand. On a stage that had hosted the world's greatest musicians, Maya walked to the grand piano at the center of the stage, its gleaming surface reflecting the overhead lights. She adjusted the bench, nodded to Helena, and placed her hands on the keys. The piece began softly, a simple melody that echoed the tune she had hummed to herself that morning at the cafe, before Richard heard her play, before everything changed. The orchestra entered gradually, adding texture and depth to the theme as it evolved. As she played, Maya felt the familiar sensation of disappearing into the music. The audience faded from her awareness. The critics and their opinions became meaningless. There was only the piano beneath her fingers, the orchestra around her, and the story they were telling together. The music built in complexity and emotion, moving from the quiet simplicity of her early life to the chaotic excitement of her discovery. Maya's hands danced across the keys with growing confidence, no longer trembling but strong and sure. The orchestra followed her lead, responding to every nuance and shift in the music as if they'd been playing together for years. In the middle section, the piece turned darker, more challenging, representing the doubt and fear she had faced. Maya let her own struggles flow through her fingers into complex harmonies and unexpected turns that had the audience leaning forward in their seats. A few critics in the front row were scribbling furiously in notebooks, their expressions a mix of surprise and reluctant admiration. And then came the resolution, a return to the original theme, but transformed, just as Maya herself had been transformed by her journey. The melody soared above the orchestra, pure and true and unmistakably her own voice. As the final notes faded into silence, Maya kept her hands hovering above the keys, eyes closed, holding on to the moment for as long as possible. The hall was utterly still. No coughs, no rustling programs, no whispers. For one terrible second she feared the worst. Then the applause began, scattered at first, then building like a wave until it filled the entire hall. People were standing, calling out, "Brava!" Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Maya stood on shaky legs and bowed, first to the audience, then to the orchestra. Helena was beaming with pride as she gestured for Maya to take another bow. The applause continued, refusing to die down. From her position on stage, Maya could see Richard in the third row, standing and applauding with tears streaming down his face. Beside him stood Diane, the conservatory dean, and several other faculty members, all looking equally moved. After 4 curtain calls, Maya finally escaped backstage where Lou and Tina were waiting. "You did it, kid," Lou said, wrapping her in a bear hug. "You knocked it out of the park." "It was beautiful," Tina added, her eyes shining. "I didn't understand all of it, but it made me cry anyway." Before Maya could respond, she was surrounded by well-wishers, orchestra members, music directors, critics who had suddenly revised their opinions, and Vivian, who was already fielding calls on her cell phone. "Carnegie Hall is interested," Vivian whispered excitedly. "And there's talk of a recording contract. This is just the beginning, Maya. You're going to be a star." The commotion in the backstage area grew as more people arrived to congratulate her. Maya felt overwhelmed, her mind still half in the music she had just played. Amidst the chaos, she caught sight of a quiet figure standing apart from the crowd, a young girl, perhaps 13 or 14, watching with wide, wondering eyes, excusing herself from Vivian and the others. Maya made her way to the girl. "Did you enjoy the performance?" she asked gently. The girl nodded, suddenly shy. "It was amazing. I've never heard anything like it. Are you a musician?" Maya asked, noticing the calluses on the girl's fingertips, the mark of a string player. "I play violin," the girl said. "But I'm not very good. My teacher says I don't have the right technique." She hesitated, then asked in a rush, "Is it true you taught yourself to play? That you didn't have lessons until last year?" Maya smiled. "That's true. I played by ear for most of my life." "Then maybe there's hope for me," the girl said quietly. "Everyone says I don't play the right way, but the music makes sense to me in my head. I just can't always get it out the way they want me to." Maya felt a surge of recognition. This girl's struggle was her own, just at a different point in the journey. She knelt down to meet the young violinist's eyes. "There isn't just one right way to make music," she said. "There are many paths, many voices. The most important thing is to be true to what you hear in your head and feel in your heart. The rest can be learned." The girl's face lit up with hope. "Really?" "Really," Maya assured her. "And if anyone ever tells you that you don't belong in music because you don't fit their idea of what a musician should be, don't believe them. Music belongs to everyone who loves it enough to put in the work." As the girl's parents called her away, Maya felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Richard, his eyes still bright with emotion. "That was quite a speech," he said. "Wise words from someone who was doubting her own place in this world not so long ago." Maya smiled, realizing that something had shifted within her during the performance. The fear was gone. Not just the stage fright, but the deeper fear that had haunted her since the beginning. The fear that she didn't belong, that her gift wasn't real or worthy because it hadn't come to her through traditional channels. "I finally understand what you've been trying to tell me," she said. "It's not about where the music comes from or how you learned to play it. It's about what you say with it, what you share." Richard nodded. "And what you shared tonight was extraordinary. I've been teaching for 30 years and I've never heard anything quite like it." He hesitated, then added, I hope you know this doesn't mean your learning is complete. You've only just begun to develop your skills. I know, Maya said, and I want to keep studying, keep growing. But I think I needed to trust my voice before I could truly be open to developing it further. The backstage area was beginning to clear as the orchestra members departed and the well-wishers moved on to the reception in the lobby. Vivian caught Maya's eye from across the room, pointing urgently to her watch. Your public awaits, Richard said with a small laugh. There are a lot of important people hoping to meet the newest star of the music world. Maya nodded, but before heading to the reception, she asked for a moment alone. In the quiet of the empty stage, she stood looking out at the now vacant hall. 6 months ago, she had been serving coffee, playing music only for herself in the privacy of her tiny apartment. Now she had shared that music with thousands, had moved them to tears and ovations. The journey had been faster and more public than she would have chosen, full of challenges and doubts and criticisms. There would be more hurdles ahead, more compositions to write, more techniques to master, more critics to face. But tonight had shown her that she had something valuable to contribute, a voice that deserved to be heard. Maya touched the piano keys one last time, playing a soft chord that resonated through the empty hall. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked toward the lobby where people were waiting to congratulate her. Not just the elite music critics and wealthy patrons, but also the cafe staff who had supported her from the beginning. As she approached the lobby doors, Maya heard the buzz of conversation on the other side, felt the weight of expectations and opportunities that awaited her. She took a deep breath, thinking of the young violinist with her unconventional approach, of Lou with his regrets about chances not taken, of Richard with his belief in her untrained talent. Then she pushed open the doors and stepped forward into her new life, not as a waitress who happened to play piano, but as a musician who happened to have an unusual path, a path that had led her exactly where she was meant to be,